Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the redistricting process in Utah. We got some news out of this state just yesterday, and it's some pretty big news. Utah, per a judge and her ruling, will have to draw new congressional maps ahead of 2026. Now, I'm here to explain what that means, what that's going to look like, and what I expect to happen. But before I do either of those, or before I do any of those things, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I make content like this every other day, and I will keep you up to date from a objective perspective on our elections, both for 2025, 2026, and of course, the presidential election in 2028. So let's get into it. Utah, this is a state that is pretty Republican. Republicans have had full control of the redistricting process, and they have drawn a map that is 4-0. It's a 4-0 map that basically guarantees that they will win all 4 seats. Now, before we talk about what this map does and why it was challenged in court, we can kind of talk about what the map was beforehand, right? So if you look at 2016, this is a good place to start. The GOP did hold all 4 seats in the state of Utah. None of them were particularly competitive. The closest one was the 4th district, which is the geographically smallest one. But even then, it was still, a 13-point victory for Mia Love, who was the GOP candidate, and she actually unfortunately passed away earlier this year, and she was quite young, which was, very sad. I just wanted to mention that because that was a pretty big deal when it happened a couple months ago. But regardless, in 2018, Mia Love ran for re-election. As you can see, she actually did lose her election. She lost to Ben McAdams, who is a moderate Democrat. But it was this was a 700-vote margin for McAdams. It was very close. But nonetheless, you can see this was a competitive district. And even then, it wasn't super fairly drawn. It still looked a little weird. But it was competitive enough where Democrats could win it in a good year. And then in 2020, mostly with the help of better Republican turnout, it did flip. But again, it was only a 3,500 vote difference. So this race was absolutely competitive. And had the district stayed the same, it would have been probably close going forward. And Ben McAdams could have absolutely maybe come back and won it in a better year for Democrats, maybe a midterm year like 2026. So Republicans wanted to avoid this, and they functionally had full control of Utah's redistricting process. So they said, okay, we're going to redraw, and we're going to draw a district that is a lot redder. And as you can see, they drew a map where the seat takes in less of blue Salt Lake City, or Salt Lake County rather, and more of these red areas down here. And what you got was a pretty different result. Burgess Owens won decisively. He got 61% of the vote, and he'd only gotten 48% the previous year. So it worked out for him, and it's now a safe map for Republicans. The closest seat now is actually not the 4th district, but the 3rd district. In 2024. Kamala Harris lost the seat by 18, so it was the bluest seat. But again, a seat that Trump won by 18 points is still not particularly competitive, barring like a really bad Republican candidate or like a really good Democratic candidate. So overall, this is a very safe map. Now, this is not the way this map is drawn, it isn't necessarily a racial gerrymander, and it doesn't violate the Voting Rights Act, which means that it is legal. Now, that on its own would, again, if it's legal, it can't be overturned in court, right? And by the way, the Supreme Court in 2019 ruled that partisan gerrymandering is basically legal. It is allowed. Partisan gerrymandering is not unconstitutional. Now, obviously, race-based gerrymandering violates the Voting Rights Act and is thus unconstitutional unless the VRA is struck down, which might happen in the future, but as of right now, it's still intact. So that means that when you draw a gerrymander that dilutes voters based on race, there's a good chance it'll get struck down by the courts. But when you draw a partisan gerrymander that is very blatantly, hurting one party and benefiting another party, it's not illegal. The court cannot overturn it. Now, the reason that this map got overturned, even though it is only a partisan gerrymander, is because in 2018, the same year that Ben McAdams won, Utah voters basically passed an independent, committee to redistrict, to basically end gerrymandering in Utah. And it was by referendum, it got a majority, and it, passed, right? Now, the reason that even though this passed in 2018, the reason that it didn't have a huge impact on the 2021 process was pretty simple. The legislature basically ignored their suggestions, and they went ahead and drew their own map because there's no mechanism by which the committee could override the legislature. The legislature still had more power. They said, it's cool that you want us to draw a fair map. We're just going to draw a gerrymander like we've always kind of done. And so What that what that meant in the short term was that it didn't really matter. The legislature got their way. So naturally, a lot of Democrats and people within Utah who are opposed to gerrymandering sued. And as of yesterday, they have won, they've achieved some legal victories in the past 2 years, and then they won this suit thanks to this judge just yesterday. So that's where we're at right now. That's kind of the story leading up to this, and now we're kind of at an interesting point because I think there's 3 ways this could go. I'll say the first way is that the legislature ignores the ruling and either tries to get it appealed or they literally just ignore it until someone else steps in. The second way is the legislature complies. They draw a safe Democratic vote sink in Salt Lake City. And the third way is that the legislature complies, but they still try to draw a softer gerrymander where they draw 2 safe red seats kind of in the rural parts of the state and then try to draw 2 narrowly red seats kind of in the Salt Lake City area, because it'll be harder for them to gerrymander to this extent, but they can still draw kind of a softer gerrymander that could still give them a 4-0 map, but also run to the risk of maybe giving Democrats 2 seats instead of 1. So for the remainder of the video, I'm going to kind of go through those 3 options, or those 3 kind of routes for the Utah legislature to take. But before we do that, I want to briefly talk about this map and kind of show why it was a gerrymander and why the plaintiffs were successful in proving that this was a partisan gerrymander. As you can see, the bluest part of Utah by far is Salt Lake City, and the Salt Lake City metro area is getting pretty blue nowadays. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other cities that are quite red, right? Like Provo is one of the most conservative cities in the country, and it is down here. It literally only has 2 blue precincts, and it's a huge vote sink for Republicans. They get hundreds of thousands of votes here every year. Now, if we go and take a look at kind of the county by county details, right? Salt Lake County is the biggest county, has over 1 million people, and it voted for Kamala Harris by 10%. So it was overall decently blue. It wasn't as deep blue as other urban counties. It wasn't like a Philadelphia or a Cook County, Illinois, but it's still blue enough where you can easily draw a congressional seat, right? You can just take in Salt Lake City in these blue parts. You can draw a seat that voted for Kamala Harris by around 20 points, and then you're done. And then the rest of the state would be safe red, right? But instead, obviously, because the Utah GOP were like, we're not going to give Democrats a seat, they cracked Salt Lake City. And you can actually see this very clearly. There's kind of like a 4-way intersection right here around the township of Mill Creek. And we have each district takes in a little bit of blue. And what that does is when they take in a little bit of blue, they lump it in with a whole lot of red. So let's just take a look at, say, District 3, right? District 3 grabs, around 150, 200,000 blue precinct population in blue precincts. Part of it's Salt Lake County, part of it's Park City, which is kind of ski town, which is pretty blue. And then they brought in with a ton of rural Republican turf over here, especially kind of around these 2 counties, which are deeply Republican. These are counties where Trump got like 80% of the vote, upwards of that. So overall, that's a gerrymander, and it gives the Republicans a seat they would have won by 19 points while also taking out some blue. And then you do the same thing for the other 3 districts, and you get a map that is actually really effectively drawn for the purpose of gerrymandering, right? Democrats are not competitive in any of these districts. If you look at 2024, the closest one was indeed I think the 2nd district, which Celeste Malloy won by 26%, or by 24%. So overall, this is not a map that was at any risk of falling. It was just a partisan gerrymander for that exact reason of splitting up Salt Lake City. So nonetheless, that's why the lawsuit was gaining traction. But to go back to the 3 potential paths, the first path, as I mentioned, is that the legislature ignores the court order. Now, this has been done in the past. Alabama did this back in 2022, and it kind of backfired because what you basically had was the court ruled that Alabama's map was a racial gerrymander. It wasn't constitutional. And that was kind of a surprise. A lot of Democrats are really happy with that because it made Alabama have to draw a second majority black seat, which would have been a Democratic voting district. But Alabama, they basically ignored it. And then what happened was the Supreme Court had to step in and order that a new map be drawn. And so it kind of backfired, right? Because you had to have a second black seat drawn, and instead of drawing it their way, the Alabama GOP didn't comply, and it kind of it kind of backfired, like I said. And so the court, having done that in 2000 or in earlier this decade, gives decent reason for the Utah GOP to kind of pause and say, okay, well, we're not necessarily going to disobey the order. We might have to comply, but it's still possible that they go ahead and ignore it. I think there's a decent chance that happens anyways, especially because they might want to like run that risk with the Supreme Court because they think the Supreme Court might rule in their favor anyways. But the second, and I think most likely outcome, is that Utah draws a Democratic vote sink. They're going to want to protect their incumbents to the extent possible. And the way that this is going to work is, as a Utah GOP legislator, you can either make one Republican incumbent angry, you can make two Republican incumbents angry. And you're probably going to go for the path of least, kind of the path of least resistance, like in the trolley problem, where like you're going to only draw one instead of two. And so the way you do that is you draw a super blue district, like I said, in Salt Lake County, and you sacrifice one incumbent, and then the other three are happy because they get super, red seats and they can stay in the Congress for as long as they want. And that's probably going to happen. It reduces competition, and it, doesn't really mean the Republicans have to invest too much in Utah, and it only gains Democrats one seat, so it's not a huge change, even though it is a little annoying for Republicans, most likely. And then the third and, I think least likely outcome at this point is that the Utah GOP draws a soft gerrymander, but again, by doing that, they kind of make two incumbents mad. So what they do is they basically say, okay, we have to redraw, but we're going to do it in a, in such a way that still gives us a chance to retain our 4-0 majority. So they can basically do a similar thing where they do split Salt Lake City, but instead of splitting it 4 ways, they split it maybe 2 or 3 ways. And that would mean that you get roughly 2 seats that are probably Trump plus 7, Trump plus 6, and they're competitive, but they're still seats that are won by Trump. And so then you could say, okay, well, maybe just our two incumbents will hold on in those Trump districts, and they'll be competitive. They'll have to, really run a real campaign, but they can still hold on. And that's risky because if it backfires, if 2026 is a decent year for Democrats and Democrats do what they did in 2018, they overperform in Utah, then what you can get is a 2-2 map where neither party has majority in Utah, which is a red state, and Republicans definitely don't want that to happen. So I get the appeal of it if you're a Republican who wants to kind of maybe roll the dice and see how much it'll play out for you. But I think the most likely outcome is that they do draw a seat, and it's absolutely possible. That's about Harris plus 20 in Salt Lake County. You give the Democrats a safe pickup, and then the other three incumbents are, very insulated. And so that's basically what's happening in Utah. Just wanted to update you all on that because if true, it could net Democrats up to 1 or even 2 seats. Again, it is possible that the Utah legislature just ignores this and that they try to pull in Alabama. I think there's a chance that happens. We'll see where that goes. But overall, this is, at least as of now, a bit of a victory for Democrats in Utah because it means they will probably be gaining, or at least potentially be getting a seat in the state with a new map. So please let me know what you think. If you have any thoughts on this state or if you have any predictions for what's going to play out here, do let me know, and I'll talk to you all very soon.